Okay, so we're all kind of drawn to these serial killer stories, right?
Yeah, it's
I mean, some of us more than others, but like, what is it about these true crime podcasts and documentaries and even fictional shows
right.
that keeps us coming back for more?
Yeah, for sure.
I think this Dark Minds podcast you sent me might have some answers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Dark Minds is
Should we take a deep dive and see what they have to
Yeah,
say?
absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so first of all, Dark Minds makes this point that our obsession with serial killers, it's not exactly a new thing.
Yeah, they mentioned that, and that's so true.
Like way back in the day,
Yeah.
you had Jack the Ripper captivating the public and all those gruesome penny dreadful stories everyone was reading.
Yeah, and it's not just like the really old stuff either.
Yeah.
Like think even in recent history, like
Yeah.
like the 80s and 90s, every time you turn on the news, it felt like they were talking about some new serial killer case.
Oh, totally. So true.
It was like a cultural obsession.
Yeah, it's like this morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
It's kind of baked into us, you know?
Yeah, I think so.
But Dark Minds also talked about how the media plays a huge role in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just like word of mouth anymore.
Right, yeah.
We've got these slick documentaries and podcasts dedicated to dissecting every detail of these cases.
Yeah, like, you know how Mindhunter goes beyond just solving the crime?
Oh, yeah.
It, like, takes you inside the minds of these killers
Totally.
through profiling and psychology.
And it's so fascinating.
Right.
It's like we're trying to solve a puzzle, and with
Yeah.
every piece we find,
Yeah.
the picture gets more and more complex.
It's like a really dark puzzle, you know?
Totally. It's like with Hannibal Lecter.
Oh, yeah. Good example.
He's this brilliant cannibalistic serial killer,
Yeah.
and yet
Neat.
he's a cultural icon.
Ugh.
Remember that scene in Silence of the Lambs?
Oh, yeah. The one through the glass.
Yeah.
Chilling.
It's so chilling,
Ugh.
but also kind of captivating.
I know, right?
It's like we're drawn to these characters.
It's like there's this
Yeah.
this dark allure to them.
Even though what they do is just horrific.
Exactly.
Mm.
And Dark Minds suggests it all comes down to this thing called morbid curiosity.
Morbid curiosity.
Yeah, it's like this,
So is that like,
this primal urge we all have.
okay, so it's like the same thing that makes us watch horror movies.
Exactly. It's like a safe way to confront our fears, you know?
Right. Because you get that adrenaline rush,
Yeah, yeah.
that fight or flight response.
But without the actual danger.
You're totally right. It's like a controlled dose of fear. I like that.
Right.
But is it, I mean,
Yeah.
could be more than just like a biological response?
Well, they talk about that on Dark Minds, too.
Really?
Yeah. Like maybe there's a psychological benefit to exploring these dark themes.
So maybe it's a way to process.
Like maybe it helps us
Yeah.
deal with our own anxieties.
Right. Like anxiety is about our own mortality.
Exactly.
Or the darker side of human nature.
Yeah, they talk about catharsis, like how confronting our fears through stories can be a way to release some of that pent-up anxiety.
That's interesting. So it's not just the thrill of it.
No, not just the thrill.
It's maybe more about self-reflection.
Right, yeah, maybe a way to understand ourselves a little bit better.
Okay, but how does the media, like how they present these stories, how does that factor in?
Well, Dark Minds makes a really interesting point about that.
Okay.
They say the media often frames these cases as puzzles to be solved,
Okay, yeah.
which of course keeps us hooked.
Of course, it's like a game.
Right.
We got to know who did it.
Yeah, we want to understand why.
Exactly. Find the pattern.
Yeah.
But does that mean that the media is sometimes, maybe even accidentally,
Oh, for sure.
glamorizing these killers?
Yeah, I think sometimes they do, even if they don't mean to.
Yeah, because it's like
Yeah.
they focus on the chase,
Yeah,
the suspense, the big reveal.
exactly. And sometimes they end up making these killers seem almost like larger than life.
Right. And that's what worries me. At what point does this fascination
Yeah.
become, I don't know, kind of messed up?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, these are real crimes.
Yeah,
Real victims.
absolutely.
It feels like there's this fine line.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
A tightrope, really.
Between exploring these stories responsibly
Yeah.
and exploiting them.
Right, and they actually talk about that directly on Dark Minds.
They do.
Yeah, they emphasize, like, we can't forget the human cost of these crimes.
Right.
We need to remember the victims,
Of course.
the families left behind.
It's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the intrigue.
Right.
Yeah, the psychology of it all.
Yeah.
And lose sight of the real tragedy.
Yeah, it's like it's a delicate balance, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we kind of keep going down this rabbit hole,
Yeah.
how do we make sure we're approaching these stories
Yeah.
with sensitivity?
You know, I think Dark Minds provides a good framework for that.
Really?
They talk about finding that sweet spot.
That sweet spot.
Yeah, where we can explore the darkness without losing sight of the light, you know?
So it's not about ignoring our curiosity.
No.
It's about channeling it.
Exactly. Like, let's be curious.
Yeah.
Let's explore these stories, but let's do it thoughtfully and ethically, you know?
I like that. Okay, so we're fascinated by serial killers.
Right.
It's not just about morbid curiosity, though. Right?
No, it's deeper than that.
It's this mix of psychology, media influence,
Yeah,
and trying to make sense of something that seems senseless.
for sure.
But Dark Minds also talk about how some of these stories
Yeah, they mentioned.
tap into these deeper societal anxieties.
Yeah, they did. What did they say about that?
Well, that's what I'm thinking we should look at next.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
Because I'm curious to hear their take on that.
Me too. It's a really interesting angle. It's like these stories, they're not just messing with our individual minds.
Right. More than that.
Yeah, like they tap into these like anxieties we all share as a society, you know?
So, like, what kind of anxieties? Give me an example.
Well, like, think about it. A lot of serial killer stories,
Okay.
they play on this idea of order being disrupted.
Okay, I see that, yeah.
Like, the world is supposed to be safe,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly it's not.
Right.
It's like this chaos that invades.
Might it be anyone, right?
Right, like that's the scary part. It could be your neighbor, your friend.
And someone in your family.
Exactly. Like, who can you really trust?
And that's terrifying because it feels like such a betrayal.
It is.
Like the people we're supposed to be able to rely on, they turn out to be.
Yeah, it's like it messes with your sense of safety.
It totally does. It's like Dark Minds was saying, it's a primal fear.
Right, like that fear of the unknown.
The fear of being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of losing control.
And when you combine that with, you know, how much we hear about crime and violence in the news.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
It's like these fears are being, like, validated, even though
Right.
statistically, you know.
Right. Statistically, it's probably not that likely.
Exactly.
But you can't help but feel like,
It makes you feel like the world's more dangerous than it is.
yeah, for sure.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Because we're drawn to these stories as a way to, like, confront our fears.
It's like we're looking for a thrill.
Yeah, but we might actually be making ourselves more afraid in the process.
Wow. Okay, you're right. It's complicated.
It is.
Okay, so back to Mindhunter for a sec.
Okay.
They were saying how it kind of shifted the focus, right?
Right. Mindhunter really went deep on the psychology.
Yeah, it wasn't so much about like,
Not just whodunit.
yeah, the gore and the violence.
They talked to, like, actual FBI profilers who were, like, pioneers in the field.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
Right. So they were trying to figure out why these people do what they do.
Which makes sense if you want to prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. You got to understand the motivation, the
Yeah.
thought process.
But I guess that's part of what makes it so fascinating, too, right? The more we understand.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, understanding their psychology.
Could help us stop it from happening.
Exactly. But on the other hand, it can feed into this, like, morbid fascination.
Oh, yeah, we get obsessed with trying to figure them out.
It's like
Even though their actions are.
it's like trying to find a rational explanation for something that's completely irrational, you know?
Oh, yeah, I totally get
It's
that.
like, can we ever really understand what goes on in the mind of a serial killer?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Me neither, honestly.
Okay, so there was this one thing Dark Minds brought up that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They talked about how the way we consume these stories, it can actually like
Oh, yeah.
mess with our sense of how much danger we're actually in.
Oh, right. They talked about the mean world syndrome, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Like, if you're constantly watching true crime, you start to think the world is way more dangerous than it is.
It's kind of messed up when you think about that.
It is.
Because we're watching these shows to like get that thrill,
Yeah, to confront our fears in a safe way.
but then we end up actually fueling those fears.
It's like we're creating our own, like, mental prison almost.
It's kind of crazy, and I'm totally guilty of this.
Oh, me too. I love true crime.
But maybe we need to be more aware of it, right?
I think so, yeah. Dark Minds definitely made me think about it more.
Me too. It's like a balance.
Right.
Yeah, we got to indulge our curiosity, but...
Yeah, but not let it take over, you know?
Okay, so changing gears a bit,
Okay.
I'm thinking about fictional serial killers.
Oh, yeah, like Hannibal Lecter.
Exactly. Why are we so drawn to these characters?
That's a good question.
I mean, they do horrible things,
yeah, it's like they should repulse us.
but we're fascinated.
I know, it's weird, right?
What did Dark Minds have to say about that?
Well, they pointed out that, like, Hannibal Lecter, he's not just some, like, mindless monster.
Right, he's not like Jason Voorhees or something.
Exactly. He's intelligent, he's sophisticated.
Yeah, he's got that whole creepy charm thing going on.
Right, and he's a functional member of society.
He's a psychiatrist.
Exactly, which makes him even more unsettling.
It's like anyone could be hiding a dark secret.
Yeah, and it's that juxtaposition that makes him so compelling.
Right. Like, he appreciates fine art, but then he also eats people.
Exactly. It's like it messes with our expectations.
And it's like, with Hannibal, there's this element of control.
Oh, yeah, he's always in control.
He's always one step ahead of everyone.
And in a world where we often feel like we have no control, you know?
Oh, totally. Like, everything's so chaotic.
Right. So it's almost like we're drawn to that sense of mastery that he has, even though it's, achieved through terrible means.
It's like he represents this dark side of human potential.
Oh, for sure.
Like, we all have this capacity for good and evil.
Right. And then he's like the embodiment of that dark potential.
That's what's so fascinating. It's like looking into a mirror, but like a distorted mirror.
Yeah, it's like it makes you question your own boundaries,
Like, am I capable of that?
Yeah, it's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is. But I'm also thinking about how these shows, they kind of make it entertaining.
Right. Yeah, like Hannibal makes the killings almost artistic.
And that's kind of dangerous. Right.
Yeah.
Because it blurs the lines between...
Yeah, they talked about that on Dark Minds, too.
You did.
Yeah, they were like, we got to be careful not to romanticize these figures.
Because it's one thing to be fascinated by Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, he's a fictional character.
But it's a whole other thing to start, like, admiring real-life serial killers.
Exactly. And Dark Minds was really clear about that. Like,
They said.
we got to remember that these are real crimes with real victims.
It's so easy to forget that.
Yeah, when you're caught up in the story.
So, okay, big picture here.
Okay.
Our fascination with serial killers, it's not just about us as individuals.
No, it's a reflection of our society, too.
What did Dark Minds say about that?
Well, they pointed out that, like, think about when serial killer stories really took off.
When was that?
Like, the late 20th century.
Oh.
It was a time of, like, a lot of social and political upheaval.
Oh, yeah, a lot of change happening.
Exactly. And people were feeling anxious.
So these stories were tapping into that.
Yeah, like, people were feeling like the world was becoming more dangerous, more unpredictable.
And these stories gave them a way to confront those fears.
Yeah, but in a safe, fictionalized way.
It's like a coping mechanism almost.
I think so, yeah.
But it's also interesting how technology has changed everything.
Oh, yeah, the internet?
Social media.
All that?
We have access to so much information now.
Right, like, you can go down a rabbit hole for hours.
Totally. And you can connect with other people who are into the same stuff.
Which can be good and bad, right?
Yeah, because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of it all.
Dark Minds actually talk about that, too.
What did they say?
They're like, we need to be critical consumers of information.
Oh, that's important.
We got to be aware of, like, biases and agendas.
So we're not just blindly accepting everything we read.
Exactly.
But it's not all bad, right? Like, Dark Minds also talked about how...
Oh, yeah, there are some positives.
Yeah.
Like, these stories, they can be disturbing,
Totally.
but they can also be incredibly insightful.
Like, they can teach us about human psychology.
Yeah, and the things that contribute to violence.
So it's like we're using these stories
To shine a light on the dark corners of human experience.
Exactly. And hopefully in doing that, we can find a way to...
To make the world a little bit safer.
I like that. That's a good note to...
Yeah.
But there's one more thing I wanted to touch on from Dark Minds.
Okay, what's that?
Okay, so we've talked about how these stories kind of tap into our fears and anxieties.
Yeah, it's like we're both drawn to them and repelled by them at the same time.
Exactly. But Dark Minds also brought up something that I thought was super interesting.
What's that?
They were talking about how shows like Hannibal, they present these killings as almost artistic, you know?
Yeah, like they're stylized, almost beautiful in a way.
Right. And does that, like, make it even more problematic? Like, are we kind of glamorizing these horrific acts?
Well, they talked about this study in Dark Minds. It was really interesting.
What did they say?
They found that people who score high on empathy...
So, like, people who are really good at understanding other people's feelings.
Exactly. Those people were actually more likely to be drawn to dark and suspenseful content.
Wait, really? That's kind of surprising.
Yeah, you'd think it would be the opposite, right?
Yeah, like, you'd think empathetic people would want to avoid that stuff.
But the researchers think it's because To really understand a character like Hannibal Lecter,
Okay.
you have to kind of step into his shoes, see the world from his perspective.
And that takes empathy.
Exactly.
But I guess there's a danger there too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, we can understand Hannibal Lecter without condoning what he does.
Right, and that's the line we have to be careful not to cross.
Because these shows, they're entertainment.
They're not real life.
Right. And they can make it easy to forget that these crimes.
They have real victims, real families who are suffering.
So it's like, how do we balance our fascination with the ethical considerations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
we're clearly drawn to these stories, but we have to be responsible about how we engage with them.
I think that's the takeaway from Dark Minds.
Like, be curious.
But also be critical.
Don't just take everything at face value.
Right, think about the victims. Think about the impact of these crimes.
And maybe try to learn something from it all, right?
Yeah, like maybe by understanding the darkness, we can find a way to create more light.
That's a great way to put it. Well, this deep dive into Dark Minds has been fascinating.
It's been a wild ride.
It really has. We've covered a lot of ground, from the history of our fascination with serial killers to the psychology behind it, the role of the media, the ethical considerations, and even the potential benefits of exploring these dark themes.
It's a complex topic, that's for sure.
It really is. But I think it's important to have these conversations to try to understand this part of ourselves, this part of our culture.
Because maybe by talking about it, by bringing it out into the open, we can start to make some progress.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.